This program is made possible by generous support from China City, with locations in Oak Harbor, Freeland, and Mill Creek, Washington, as well as these local businesses.
Looking back, I think there was an advantage to being an only child of a single working mother. It made me self-reliant, and it made me understand how to be myself. My mother would come home much later after I'd come home from school, unlock the door to my apartment, our apartment, and I had done the chores and homework and listened to the radio, so I was used to being a lot by myself. My mother divorced when I was only 2 years old. We moved to where her parents lived, just in Westchester County, outside of New York City, and I was very relieved to have grandparents there that could share in the burden because my mother was beautiful and she was very emotional, she began to drink. And having my grandparents there was a big help. Later on, she began to rely more on alcohol and pills. And I was not able to go to a four-year college. I became like many young women become, where there's a dependent parent and they really feel torn between staying at home or going out and making their mark. And I had that position, but I had an ally who suggested to my mother that I might get a 3-year nursing degree by going into New York to Bellevue Hospital for their program, and I'd just be an hour away, and I could come back and visit. Unfortunately, I actually didn't go home often enough. Bellevue was a wonderful teaching hospital. It was a public hospital, and I really loved learning to nurse there and nursing to the very needy. I also loved living in New York City. I would love the arts, and I would go out as much as I could afford. It wasn't very much, but the whole city was the arts. After that, I left Bellevue to work at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, and there I worked the night shift from 12 midnight to 8 a.m. I really still wanted to see the world, and so I applied to Pan American Airlines to be a stewardess. That was the way to do it. That was the most prestigious, the most glamorous job a young woman at that time could have. I met all the qualifications. I was the right height, the right weight. They took me and looked at my hair to see if it wasn't colored. I was single, that was important, and I speak a little bit of French, and I was a nurse. However, they were in a hiring freeze, so there was no job there for me at that time. So I then, wanting to take on the world, went to school. I wanted to get some college. So I went to Columbia University School of General Studies, and I studied during the day, and I worked as a nurse at night. Still wanted to have a social life. So friends were going skiing, and I signed on to go skiing, and I was on that trip when I got the notice that my mother had died. 3 months before, I had to admit her to the New York State Psychiatric Hospital. So I left the group and went home, closed the apartment, and made the funeral arrangements. Sad as that was, that part of my life, it also was allowing me then to travel. On the Columbia University campus, I met Paul Schlachtenhofen. And he was a handsome law student from Iowa. He was the oldest of 6 wonderful family, and he invited me to go back and meet his family in Iowa. So I did, and I fell in love with the whole group. On New Year's Eve in 1962, back in New York, Paul proposed. On New Year's Day, I got a Western Union telegram that I was accepted to Pan Am. Being young and impetuous, of course I accepted both. However, remember, you had to be single to be a stewardess. So I flew for 6 months. I saw major cities in the world, and then I came back to marry Paul. We lived in Brooklyn Heights at the time, and I remember walking with him, and he got very excited, and he said, I think if we move to the Northwest, we can really make a difference. It's hard in New York City to do that, but he loved Seattle. He'd come out to the World's Fair, and he had clerked in Portland. I, never having seen it, talked to friends in New York who hardly was on their radar. What, Seattle? Well, you would leave New York to go to Seattle? Yes, in a heartbeat, start a new life with Paul in Seattle. It was just like a dream of travel. I was very excited about it. So he came to Seattle. Paul had a job as a lawyer at Perkins Coie. I worked at a Swedish hospital, and we really wanted to make a difference, so we joined Allied Arts of Seattle. And at that time, we got right into the campaign that they were waging to save the Pike Place Market from destruction. It was going to be torn down for high-rise and so forth. So that was a successful campaign, and I also got involved with the Roadside Council to remove billboards that used to be prolific in the city of Seattle. I was a volunteer counselor at Planned Parenthood, and I got to know the Medina Adoption Agency and really liked them. And so we adopted our daughter, Jamie, from Medina. It was a surprise call that we answered that we were to go to Medina offices to pick up our daughter, who was just 3 days old. And there was a snowstorm, so we drove through the snowstorm and brought her home. It was fabulous. I hadn't lost the love of the arts, and I immediately, Paul and I were immediately attracted to Margaret Booker, who was in the process of creating the Intiman Theater. She lived on Capitol Hill, and so we helped her. Later on, I was on the board, which was really like a full-time job, and there I learned experiences like business experiences and leadership experiences that I might not have learned any other way if you weren't just thrown into the thick of it. When I was the board president, Intiman nearly went bankrupt. Remember, they sometimes put the women are usually right at that position when it's almost going down. But on the other hand, it was an advantage. There was an advantage to it because the board rallied around me. We had thought that by moving to a permanent home, that would solve our financial problems. And a developer was going to put us into a high-rise new development downtown. Unfortunately, well, first thing I did in order to keep us going was I went to 3 friends and asked them to guarantee a loan that we had, which was $150,000. They agreed to do it, not thinking they'd ever have to pay. So unfortunately, this new building got mired down in controversy. So we couldn't build it. We were in a terrible jam. I, as president, we had a marathon meetings, and we came up with a plan. And it was wonderful. The board really rallied around each one of us. And seeing that, a corporate sponsor thought, you know, there's really life still in Intiman and reason for it to go, and he bailed us out so we were able to go forward. Of course, we couldn't move at the time, but later on, Intiman did move. I was there, and we went to the Seattle Center and created a wonderful home there. So it all turned out very well. In fact, it turned out so well that we became the regional Tony winner for the best regional theater in the United States, and the best play, which was Light in the Piazza. Paul was co-chair of the Goodwill Arts Festival. That was a part of the Goodwill Games. And the reason for the Goodwill Games, and this was 1990, was that the Soviet-American relations was at such a bad point that smart people were trying everything they could to make things more positive. And our own Island Arts Council invited, when the Goodwill Arts Festival was here, the Japanese Kabuki Theater and the Savremenic Russian theater from Russia to Whidbey Island to have a picnic on our property. Yeah, Langley, Whidbey Island. It was wonderful. The Japanese had never seen such tall trees, and of course they admired the trees. And the Russian considered Clinton a fishing village. And, and we got along so well that international relations were improved here on Whidbey Island. San Juan Island had built a theater, and people here wanted a theater too. Although we were weekenders, Paul and I came and helped Deborah Waterman and George Henney and all those build Wicca. Do you all know that Wicca is going to have its 20th anniversary this May? And I hope you all come. I married a man who couldn't stay in one job. He was always changing jobs every 7 years. However, they were really good jobs, interesting jobs, and they all made a difference. And so I was very, very supportive. He was director of Seattle's Department of Community Development. He started his own Cornerstone Development Company. He was a port commissioner, and he became dean of the College of Architecture without being an architect. Here in Langley, we built the Inn at Langley, the Boatyard Inn, and 2 buildings on 2nd Street. Neither of us had money growing up, so we had as adults, different ways of spending it. He was a positive, a dreamer, a visionary, and he could figure out a way to leverage money to get his projects built. I was kind of the opposite, but I had the checkbook, so I felt I had a little control. But if he hadn't been that way, we wouldn't have done all this marvelous things, that more than we could have ever imagined, that dream of really making a difference, having a most interesting life occurred because of this combination. The last project we had was the Four Seasons Hotel in Seattle. It's right across from the Art Museum. And I was there on all the design meetings, and I'm very proud of what a beautiful hotel it is. When the opportunity came to run for mayor, Jamie and I encouraged her dad, my husband. We thought he would be a great mayor. We did everything that you do for campaigns. We doorbelled, we had events, we raised money, we held up signs to passing cars, even in the rain, and lo and behold, he was elected the 50th mayor of Seattle for a 4-year term that would end in 2002. This was a tumultuous time. It was a hard time to be a mayor. There was the World Trade Organization rioting. And President Bill Clinton came to Seattle, and we told him what was going on. He said, "Be careful what you wish for." Not only that, that was, if you remember, the time, 2000, of the Millennium Y2K freakout, and it was the time that Rassam, the terrorist, was captured at the border, and Paul had to close the Seattle Center for New Year's celebration. There was a young man that was killed in a riot down at Pioneer Square for Mardi Gras, and we had a earthquake, and let me not forget that we had 9/11, the attack on the World Trade Center. All these things during his time. The WTO, the World Trade Organization event, didn't turn out the way he had hoped. I mean, he really had been a port commissioner and really believed in trade, and instead everything dissolved, and it left him quite depressed after the rioting. However, there were wonderful things that happened while he was mayor. One of his projects was the Neighborhood Matching Grant Project, which meant that communities could get money for sweat labor that they would do on their favorite projects. And so I would get picked up after work around weekends, really, and we would go and see what was happening. And it was so enlivening to see people using their own money, their own time rather, and the city is helping with the money, and working on these projects and seeing the difference that it made in community spirit. So that was one of the very nice things about that time. And another was that I was there when all these different buildings were opened, and Paul was very interested in architecture and design, so it was very exciting. One was the new public library, downtown Seattle. One was the Opera House. One was City Hall, and also there was the Justice Center. So we had so much to be proud of that we could see as a legacy in time past. Then there was the Cedar River Visitor Center, which you all should visit. Seattle gets its water from the Cedar River, and there's a beautiful center which gives the history and lets you know more about it. As First Lady, I had that wonderful opportunity to support causes, many, many causes, but I did have two that I got more involved in than others. One was the Lutheran Centers, the Lutheran Compass Centers, transitional housing for women. This is for homeless women, and it gave them a place that they could stay for up to 3 years. It's in Seattle on Thomas Street. The other was the Susan G. Komen Foundation, which you all know about, and has wonderful programs to prevent breast cancer. We had a race, of course. At the University of Washington, I served on the advisory board, and it was a good thing because I had made friends there because 4 years later, I had my own bout with breast cancer. Paul and I enjoyed the minority communities so much. They were so appreciative of any time we could give them, just being present. And so every evening, there were many, many events in town, but those particularly, every evening, Paul and his police escort would pick me up and we'd go and attend these different things. And when we were the minorities, we couldn't have felt more appreciated. Later on, this was so important because of the 9/11, and we had made so many friends during that period of time. President Bush encouraged people after 9/11 to report suspicious activities. This was very hard on Middle Eastern people all across in all the cities because they felt that they were the brunt of all this observation and suspicion. Even in Seattle, if you remember, a mosque was firebombed. Paul tried his very best to bring all these Middle Eastern people together and try to give them a sense of security. And one thing that he and I decided to do, at the Seattle Center was a flower memorial for the victims of 9/11. And we said we would walk with the Sikhs behind their banner and show our solidarity with them. And they were so appreciative. And for us, it was such a step that we'll never forget. That was one of those most memorable times in the time he was mayor. Nevertheless, after the WTO and the battle in Seattle, people began to worry about Seattle's niceness quotient, which we always had been a nice city, and suddenly we were known for this riot and event. So Paul was not reelected. Jamie and I were very disappointed. I'm not sure that Paul was so much, because we were able to retreat to our weekend home here in Langley and get involved here. The relationship between the three of us was so deepened because of Paul's time as being mayor, and so it has always continued. So he came to Langley, and we became similarly involved in the life and future of Langley. If you notice, the building behind was one of our favorite buildings. And yes, think of where that is. And then we both came back to Wicca, and we were able to attend the things that we had been missing and wishing we had seen all that time. So for 51 years of marriage, Paul and I had had a wonderful partnership, and people came to me and said he was a mentor to them and he was an inspiration to them. And I myself felt so inspired by him, and it created such wonderful opportunities. The love of my life brought me here to the West Coast, and life just opened, and we had a more interesting life than we ever could have imagined when we were living in New York City. In Langley, we had built the Inn at Langley, the Giraffe Building, the Boatyard Inn, and these were left to me so that I had to go ahead with them. But I felt that with our partnership and with my opportunity to be a sounding board all along, that I had the strength and energy and interest on maintaining these properties and excited about how they continue to be a part of our little community here. I enjoy, yes, there's Jamie and me walking at Double Bluff. I enjoy being a part of the partnership with the community for these businesses. And Jamie and I both honor our pledge that here in Langley and Whidbey Island, we want to continue to make a difference because this community means so much to us. Thank you.